Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Hurd, and this is BUSA 6621, Executive Perspectives in Leadership. And we're talking today about Chapter 14, Social Identity Leadership, how we assume the mantle of leadership because we belong to a particular group or we have a particular identity. Let's talk some more. So with social identity leadership, it's not about you, it's about us, putting your ego aside. And just some quick examples that come to mind: a marching band. If you've been part of a band or an orchestra, you are a band geek. And so you feel it, you know it. It's about the belonging to this social club. Or perhaps you've been in the military, that kind of band of brothers feeling. Or maybe you've been on an athletic team, a soccer team, a volleyball team, a football team, and you know what that feels like. You're part of that group, and that group is the group that gives you that identity. So basically, social identity leadership flips the script on the classic leader as lone genius. And it tells us that leadership is really about a team sport, more like a pickup basketball game than a TED Talk. I love that line. We lead best when we're seen as one of us, when it's, again, the collective. It's aligning who we are to the group's identity. Okay, it's less about charisma and more about being the person your team trusts to represent who they are. So you will see social identity leadership in action everywhere in those examples that I gave you, and much more. So these groups succeed not because one person shines, but because the whole group shines. It sees themselves as the collective we. So let's talk more about social identity leadership. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about how it works. We're going to discuss the strengths and the criticisms and the applications of social identity leadership. So what is it? What is it when we say social identity leadership? So, throughout our lives, we become part of social groups from which we kind of derive a part of who we are, our identity. And these groups are representative of just all facets of our lives, and they provide a good answer to the question, who am I? And some of the groups are broad in scope. Some, for example, our gender, our religion, our political affiliation, our nation, our ethnicity, and our sexual orientation. And then other kind of groups or facets are narrower. Okay, and these can be based on what we do, like our interest, our hobbies, or our work team, the company we work for, our profession or family. So social identity leadership provides this unique way of conceptualizing leadership that focuses on the social identities of the followers, us, and leaders, and our mutual impact on the leadership process. And so from this perspective, leadership is a social group. It's a member-based process. It's not about the leader per se, but rather about the leadership process. And that's the important distinction. And an early formulation of social identity leadership was laid out by Hogg in 2001. And the fact that we say 2001 means this is a young research theory or leadership theory. In an article called called A Social Identity Theory of Leadership. And then 10 years later, The New Psychology of Leadership was published, providing a summary of the major principles around identity leadership. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So what is it? So social identity leadership is a follower-centric approach to leadership, meaning that followers play a pivotal role in how leadership emerges and is accomplished. Social identity leadership is concerned with the group members and how they see themselves as members of a group, and the implications of belonging to that group and how that group operates and really seeks to achieve its goals. It's a novel approach to leadership in that it focuses on leaders and followers, on how leaders and followers view themselves in the group context and how they interpret who they are through shared social identities. It also kind of asserts that when people see themselves as sharing a social identity with others, they align their behaviors with the values and goals of the group, and they're more likely to cooperate and exert influence on one another. And so a good company example is Amazon, the Amazon way. And when you meet people who've worked at Amazon, they'll talk about this is how we did it together, how we made things work. It's just how we operate. And I'm sure you can think of some other companies like Nordstrom's, who's known for their customer service. If you work for Nordstrom, you know that you embrace that customer service approach, and no one's going to question whether you say no or yes to a customer, because that's how you operate as a team. The Southwest spirit is another one that comes to mind. So these things about, I work for Southwest, which means that I'm free to be myself. I show up quirky. I show up as collective, representing the Southwest spirit. So in continuing social leadership defined, groups and these social identities they give rise, what they give, are constantly evolving. And the leaders play a crucial role in shaping how these social identities evolve. And so the social identity approach has been defined as this kind of recursive, multidimensional process because it centers on the leader's capabilities or capacities to represent, advance, kind of create, and embed a shared sense of social identity for the group. By saying things like, this is how we behave, this is who we are, this is what we stand for. And so with social identity, in the foundational work of it, two researchers, Tangerfield and Turner, analyzed that the consequences that came from people seeing themselves as part of the group and their relationship to others in that group and their relationship to others in the groups resulted in social identity kind of belonging. And they suggested that people's behaviors can be driven by their identity as a unique individual, as well as by their identity that comes from being a part of this group or identifying with the group. So social groups help us describe who we are as a person, and these groups help us feel like we're part of something. They help us create kind of our sense of self and being a part in the group with others and seeing one's group in relationship with other groups. So you take that a step further with self-categorization. And so that's closely linked to the concept of social identity. And it suggests that an individual's kind of subjective sense of self can come not only from the conception of their unique personal identity, but also from the shared group membership that they're in. And then the second kind of categorization going on here is qualitatively different from the first in that it prompts people to incorporate others as part of their self, of their sense of self. So if you're part, again, of a marching band, how your bandmate behaves becomes a part of how you behave as well. So it puts it all together. So understanding group members' social identities is kind of the essence of social identity leadership theory, because effective leaders can move followers towards goals by adapting to and reinforcing their own and their followers' social identities. It's all coming together. And you can see from these images, you go from personal identity, me, I am Beth, to we are women. So just putting that in context for you. When we think about the dimensions of social identity, there's group members or followers. They are the central building blocks for social identity leadership. And much of the early research on social identity leadership focused primarily on the importance of a leader being seen as a representative of the kind of the group, the characteristics of the group. But subsequent social identity leadership research expanded that focus on the dimensions that contributed to a leader's shared identity with the followers. And those 4 dimensions are here on the screen, and we're going to talk more about those in the next slides. So when you look at that just in a visual kind of way, this sense of we and us, making us matter, being one of us, creating a sense of us, and doing it for us, these are the different dimensions that were in the prior slide: identity, impresaurship, identity, prototypicality, and more. Let's leave it at that. So under the first dimension, being one of us, identity advancement, doing it for us, identity entrepreneurship, crafting a sense of us, and identity impresarioship, making us matter. So the dimensions of social identity leadership. There's also a development model for this theory. And so less attention has been given to the theory construction that would explain kind of the other major variables of social identity model and how these variables are related to one another. And a visual representation of social identity leadership process, including kind of its major components and how they're interrelated, are in figure 14.3, and we're going to take a look at that here in a minute. And also the model provides a basis for generating kind of empirical research to validate and refine the concepts and principles of the approach to leadership. Again, that's what the development model of social identity theory does. Here's that visual representation. You go from we're all part of kind of this mass of people, and then we move into how are we connected? That's shared social identity. And then using one of the dimensions is how that group interacts with the leader to achieve the outcomes. So let's explain how it actually works. So the social identity leadership approach or process works in a way that's really quite different from the other leadership theories, the other approaches. Rather than the leader being the focal point, it's the group or the group's identity that are central. And when that happens, effective leaders emerge from the group because they're attuned to what's happening in the group. They're attuned to the dynamics of the group. And the leader is the one who best fits in with others in the group and understands how to fully engage with the group members. So saying that again, it's the leader that emerges is the one who best fits with the member of the group. So you don't have to be, I don't want to say different, but you got to be very much one of them to be a leader in one of these social identity groups. So this theory also prescribes that certain behaviors can help a leader be more effective. And so the leader can demonstrate that they'll stand up for the group. They'll represent the group, that they have the group's interest at heart. And leaders can advance their influence on group outcomes such as goal attainment by creating situations that promote group kind of this esprit de corps, and they shape and embed the values and the ideals of the group. This approach, social identity leadership, also puts the focus on the group members and the group dynamics. So it suggests or it addresses the questions of like, how do group members see themselves? How do they see the group? Who's the most emblematic of the group? And what would be the most effective thing to do at supporting the group and championing its interest? So it puts the focus on the group members more so than other theories. So what are some of the strengths of social identity theory? So it really makes several positive contributions to our understanding of the leadership process. First, it's unique. It's unique in comparison to other leadership approaches because it's derived from research on group dynamics and the role of social identity in those groups. Second, it introduces an innovative leadership concept of group or identity. And then third, the social identity leadership theory or approach has a strong prescriptive quality. It's easy to understand when you're a part of a group that you belong to. It also provides a roadmap for leaders when they join a new group and for group members who want to become a leader of that group. It also has this quality that's heuristic in that it can be helpful as a model to explain effective and ineffective leadership at really any level. And from a research perspective, theory building on social identity can be advanced because a validated measure of social identity has been created. And so the Identity Leadership Inventory, ILI, has been found to distinguish successfully between the different dimensions, advancement, entrepreneurship, and more of social identity leadership. So that's a key cornerstone to this theory. So what are some of the criticisms of this theory? Well, first of all, it's relatively new, and so it hasn't yet been widely studied. It does lack some conceptual clarity. If you're kind of like wrapping your head around this, it's because it's so new. That's why I tried to provide you with some examples of social identity groups and how those leadership models kind of show up in those groups. Another kind of criticism is that it's challenging at times to understand the process of social identity leadership. Like, when do the leaders actually show up in these groups? How do they evolve? How do they develop, and more? And then it focuses on social influence. And so that's less clear on how it exactly kind of speaks to the emergent leaders or the assigned leaders, because there's so much social influence. Typically, leaders have to grow into that. In this case, they might not have that ramp up time. And then last, while there are 4 dimensions of this theory and they seem useful, are they really the most or the best to explain the constructs of this theory, that explain how this theory actually works? So like other kind of newish leadership theories, more research is needed. It's more needed to further establish which constructs or principles are most central to explaining how social identity leadership works. So what would be the applications of social identity leadership? So you have a picture here of an MBA cohort in your honor, everyone. So effective social identity leadership is centered on the leader's ability to establish themselves as an exemplary group member. Now, an MBA cohort is a great example of that, because if someone can establish themselves as just a dependable, thoughtful leader in an MBA cohort, the social identity process starts to point to that person as the leader of that group. But first, that leader had to be a really good group member. So that, in essence, is how you would apply social identity leadership at work. And then that leader embodies the 4 dimensions of shared identity leadership. Being one of us, doing it for us, creating a sense of us, making us matter. When that leader can do that, this theory is being applied. And so to really do this successfully requires the leader to turn towards the group, into the social context, to create bonds with and gain kind of the acceptance of the other group members, or you're going to have the other group members saying, he doesn't represent us. So you've got to be very cognizant that you're representing the group at all times. Another research identified kind of the 3 broad actions that leaders should implement to influence a group using social identity leadership. And these are things that you could take back and think about, how could I be that leader when they have this very strong social context? Maybe you're part of a different cohort at work, for example, or maybe you're part of a professional council of your peers, and you want to show up as the leader because the social context is that professional group of peers. So the 4 R's: reflecting, representing, and realizing. So reflecting speaks to how well you get to know the group and how they're assigned or how they want to be led. And so you've got to understand the group's history, their culture, their identity, and really understand what makes them tick and whether there are any kind of subgroups within that bigger group. And so being seen as a good group member is very important when it comes to reflecting it, and that takes time. The next one is representing. And so once you as a leader have determined kind of the nature of your group, then you need to represent that group effectively to engage that group as your follower. And so to do so, your actions, beliefs, and language matter, and they must reflect and advance the group's values and goals. So you have to sound like the group. That means you may have to suppress maybe some of your natural other behaviors, your innate behaviors, to sound like the group. And representing allows you to connect with the group and position yourself as kind of central to the group's efforts and endeavors. Okay? So getting just a little bit deeper on representing, the researcher said you got to demonstrate yourself as prototypical of the group. You have to engage in activities that reflect and exemplify the group's identity. And you have to make sure that the organization structures, procedures, and practices are in line with the group's identity. So it all has to be the we here. And then last, realizing if you want to be seen the leader of a social identity group, this group that has a very powerful identity as a big team or big group, you have to develop social identity leadership that emphasizes that the group matters. And so you have to advance the interest of that group. And so you have to channel the efforts of the group members to create a social force that makes the group matter, while also addressing or analyzing the strengths and addressing weaknesses of those who might undermine the group. And so some ways that you can do this is, first, help the group accumulate things that it values, and that will realize the group in a significant way. And then also you must work with the group to create a social world where it can live according to its values. So provide that environment where the group can really, really thrive. So these are the items the things, the actions that you can use to actually apply this when you are in the context of a strong social identity group. There are the the 3 R's when it comes to what you can do: reflecting, representing, and realizing. And that was chapter 14, Social Identity Leadership. Thank you for listening, everyone. Have a great week.